Imagine waking up tomorrow to find that 1/5 of the entire world's oil supply has simply vanished overnight.
Right, just totally gone.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like the inciting incident of a Hollywood disaster movie, doesn't it? But for the global markets right now, this isn't fiction, it's playing out in real time.
It really is. And the ripple effects of that single missing piece of the puzzle are moving incredibly fast. They're disrupting everything from, the price of your groceries to the stability of entire governments.
Well, welcome to the Speak Up English Hub. If you're joining us for today's advanced listening practice for fluency, you are absolutely in the right place. Our mission in this program is to unpack a stack of complex global reports covering everything from geopolitics to technology bottlenecks and really just extract the essential insights you need to understand where the world is heading.
Exactly.
And of course, we're doing this to help you practice high-level English comprehension. You're sitting right here in the room with us as we piece all of this together.
And today, we are looking at a world that is fundamentally running out of physical capacity. We're going to explore how a sudden, unprecedented oil shortage in the Middle East is rippling through the global economy, forcing political showdowns in the U.S., and even hitting a surprising brick wall in the digital realm of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, which is wild. But we'll also look at how one specific city is somehow managing to thrive amidst all this broken global plumbing.
Right.
So let's just start with this invisible crisis happening in the physical world.
Yeah.
The premise here is stark. There's an ongoing war involving Iran, and it's effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah.
For those who don't follow maritime geography closely, this is a very narrow choke point in the Middle East. Shutting it off removes roughly 14 million barrels of oil a day from the global market.
Which is huge. Energy experts have warned for decades that this specific scenario would trigger the biggest oil supply shock in human history, which is actually what makes the current market reaction so incredibly difficult to comprehend. The disconnect between what the textbooks say should happen and what traders are actually doing is fascinating.
Tell me about it.
I mean, analysts predicted that if the strait ever closed, the price of Brent crude oil would immediately double to well over $150, maybe even $200 a barrel.
But I'm looking at the numbers right now, and oil is hovering around $125 a barrel. I mean, yes, that's high, but it's not apocalyptic.
No, it's not.
And if you look at the futures markets, which is where speculators bet on where the price is going to be, they actually expect the price to drop to $88 by 2026. Wait, that makes absolutely 0 sense to me. The most important oil route on Earth is blocked. How can the market expect prices to drop?
Well, the market is essentially calling this a bluff.
Really?
Yeah, traders are acting as if this historic disruption is just, a temporary glitch. They seem to believe that America and Iran will inevitably strike a peace deal, the strait will reopen, and oil will just flow freely again tomorrow.
Huh. Reminds me of an analogy. Think of the global economy right now like a family that just lost their main source of income, but they're living off their savings.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
For the first few weeks, life feels completely normal. You still go out to dinner, you still pay the rent. But beneath the surface, that bank account is draining incredibly fast.
That's a great way to visualize the physical mechanics of what's happening. Let's look at the sobering math behind that draining bank account. The world is currently facing a net shortfall of 12.3 million barrels a day.
Wow.
That's more than 10% of total global consumption just gone. So how is the world surviving? We are literally burning through our savings. The global economy is draining commercial oil stocks by up to 8 million barrels a day.
Just emptying the storage tanks.
Yes, exactly. And on top of that, rich countries are releasing their strategic reserves. The International Energy Agency, the IEA, they agreed to an unprecedented drawdown of 400 million barrels from emergency stores.
But you can't substitute constant daily flows with finite storage tanks forever. I mean, we're already seeing the localized pain of this strategy breaking down. I was reading a report that a single barrel of diesel is selling for $600 in some places.
It's unbelievable.
In Myanmar, prices at the fuel pump have literally doubled. In Pakistan, they've jumped 52%. And in Sri Lanka, the fuel shortage is so severe, the government had to institute a 4-day work week, giving everyone Wednesdays off just to conserve energy.
And the really critical detail there is the diesel. Refined products, things like diesel and jet fuel, are running out much faster than unrefined crude oil. And when a vital physical resource is strained to the breaking point like this, it forces countries to make drastic, sometimes permanent choices about who they partner with.
And that's exactly why this oil shortage is actively reshaping the map of global power, right? because the strain of these shortages is causing alliances we've known for decades to fracture under the pressure.
Absolutely. Look at the massive shift happening in the Middle East right now. After nearly 60 years of membership, the United Arab Emirates has walked out of OPEC.
Wow.
Now, OPEC is the cartel of oil-producing nations that manages global oil prices by setting strict production quotas for its members.
And the UAE just entirely rejected those quotas. I mean, they want to pump 5 million barrels a day, which is a huge jump from their previous limit of 3.6 million barrels.
Right.
They clearly don't want to play the game of artificially keeping prices high anymore. They just want sheer volume.
They want volume. But this isn't just a spreadsheet decision, it's a profound geopolitical realignment.
How so?
Well, the UAE's departure highlights a deepening rift with Saudi Arabia, the country that effectively leads OPEC. The two nations have been at odds in regional proxy conflicts, like in Yemen and Sudan. By leaving the cartel, the UAE is openly pivoting away from Saudi Arabia's sphere of influence and aligning itself much more closely with the United States and Israel for its security.
Which is a bold move, considering the ongoing regional war with Iran. The UAE is essentially betting its future on a long-term partnership with the U.S., focusing on technology and investment, not just fossil fuels.
Yes.
But that pivot assumes the U.S. is a pillar of stability. And right now, the situation in Washington is incredibly volatile.
Extremely volatile. You have an explosive mix of economics and politics colliding in the U.S. right now. The energy costs from the oil crisis we just discussed are a major driver of above-target inflation in America.
Right.
At the same time, President Donald Trump is publicly demanding lower interest rates to boost the economy.
And the political backdrop couldn't be more tense. Internationally, President Trump recently canceled a trip by his envoys to Islamabad for diplomatic talks.
Yeah.
And domestically, the instability is palpable. He just survived a third assassination attempt at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. A 31-year-old man from Los Angeles managed to rush past security with concealed weapons.
It's a highly charged, high-stakes environment. And sitting right at the intersection of this intense political pressure and the global inflation crisis is the Federal Reserve, America's central bank.
Right, and there's a big shakeup happening there, too.
Exactly. Jerome Powell, the current chairman, is stepping down from the top job, though he'll remain as a governor since the Justice Department dropped an investigation into him. Replacing him is Kevin Walsh.
See, if I'm Kevin Walsh walking into this, my instinct is to hike interest rates to kill the inflation caused by these oil shortages.
Naturally.
But doing that when a president is actively demanding rate cuts feels like career suicide. Is he just trapped between the math and the politics?
He is walking a serious tightrope. This clash between raw politics and economic reality is arguably the Fed's greatest crisis in 50 years. Walsh's primary challenge is maintaining the central bank's independence. He has to steer monetary policy based on hard data, not political demands.
Right, and he's talking about implementing what he calls regime change.
Yeah, but regime change in this context isn't a political revolution, it's an economic strategy.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
Walsh wants to fundamentally change how the Fed operates. He wants to shrink the Fed's immense balance sheet. For years, the Fed bought up assets to keep long-term rates low, pumping money into the system. Shrinking that balance sheet pulls money out, which can cool the economy without necessarily having to dramatically hike the headline interest rate.
Got it.
He also wants to talk less in public about the future path of rates, basically reducing the drama. The test is whether he can implement these technocratic reforms while holding the line against political attacks.
It's fascinating how the Fed's struggle to manage inflation is so deeply tied to physical constraints, the fact that we literally can't pump enough oil. But what really stands out in our exploration today is that this same problem of physical constraints is quietly suffocating an industry we usually think of as limitless.
You're talking about the tech sector.
Exactly.
Yep.
The tech sector.
Yeah, we are seeing a severe compute crunch in artificial intelligence. For decades, there's been this cheery assumption in Silicon Valley that computing power always gets faster, smaller, and cheaper.
Right. Moore's Law and all that.
Exactly. But right now, the AI industry is quite literally running out of physical processing power.
And the numbers are just staggering. Between January and March of this year, weekly token consumption quadrupled. For you listening, a token in AI is essentially a snippet of text or data that a language model processes.
Right.
We are just gorging on these tokens. The demand is so intense that Meta is slashing 10% of its entire workforce just to reallocate those funds into making their AI operations run more efficiently.
The capital expenditure is almost hard to wrap your head around. This year alone, the five big tech hyperscalers, Amazon, Google, Meta, Microsoft, and Oracle, are spending over $750 billion on physical infrastructure.
Okay, but if they're throwing nearly $1 trillion at the problem, why is there still a crunch? Usually in tech, if you throw enough money at software, it scales infinitely.
Because you can't just write a line of code to generate physical hardware.
Right.
AI lives in the physical world. To build an AI data center, you need highly specialized physical equipment. You need industrial transformers, you need switchgear.
Wait, switchgear, you mean like heavy industrial electrical panels?
Essentially, yes. It's the massive electrical infrastructure required to safely manage the incredible amount of power these data centers draw so they don't literally melt down.
Wow.
You also need gas turbines for reliable power generation. And some of this heavy industrial equipment has a wait list of 2 to 5 years.
2 to 5 years. So even if Google writes a blank check today, the building can't turn on until 2030.
Yep. And that's just the power infrastructure. The tightest bottleneck of all is the silicon itself, the advanced microchips.
Right.
Two companies hold almost all the cards. NVIDIA, which designs the chips, and TSMC in Taiwan, which physically manufactures them. Because they sit at the absolute choke point of the global economy, their pricing power is enormous. NVIDIA's gross margin has shot up to about 75%.
That's insane.
And TSMC's is above 60%.
I know Elon Musk recently pitched a massive idea to rival TSMC. He was talking about raising something like $5 to $13 trillion to build an alternative manufacturing base.
He was, yeah.
If a coalition of tech billionaires just throws an unimaginable amount of money at this, couldn't they just buy their way out of the bottleneck?
It's a logical thought, but it completely misunderstands how advanced supply chains actually work. You cannot instantly buy a complex manufacturing ecosystem, no matter how many trillions you have.
Even with 13 trillion.
Even then. Displacing TSMC is incredibly difficult because it involves decades of specialized institutional knowledge. It's precision engineering at an atomic scale, and it relies on highly integrated networks of suppliers, who themselves have suppliers. Even tech giants like Google have spent a decade trying to build viable alternative chips, and they're only just now starting to manage it.
So the timeline is basically fixed. The infrastructure takes years to build, regardless of the budget.
Exactly. Which means the consequence of this physical scarcity is that the cost to use artificial intelligence is inevitably going to rise. Right now, AI companies are burning through billions of dollars, subsidizing the cost to lure users in and build habit.
Right.
But eventually, they have to turn a profit.
Meaning the era of cheap, limitless AI is coming to an end. Companies are going to have to fundamentally shift their mindset. You can no longer just ask if your business is using AI. You're going to have to ask if you're using it efficiently.
Because every single query, every single token is going to cost you real money.
It really connects back to the overarching theme we're seeing today: crisis and constraint. The Middle East oil supply is choked, US political systems are volatile, and the seemingly infinite digital world is bottlenecked by physical hardware.
It's all connected.
Yet, against all odds, there is one sector in one city that is inexplicably thriving amidst all this global breakdown. And that brings us to the anomaly of London.
It's a remarkable bright spot in our reports. We're talking specifically about London's financial sector. To understand why its success is so surprising, you really have to look at the macroeconomic gloom surrounding Britain.
Yeah, the vibes haven't been great.
No, they haven't. Inflation is high, national debt is high, and for years there were terrifying predictions about what leaving the European Union would do to the country.
Hold on. I remember the Brexit headlines vividly. People thought the city was completely finished as a global hub. I read predictions saying Brexit would cost London up to 232,000 finance jobs. Are you saying those predictions were just entirely wrong?
The reality has defied almost all the pessimistic forecasts. The financial plumbing of London proved to be far more resilient than anyone anticipated.
Well, the stats certainly back that up. Today, there are 1.1 million financial jobs in London. That's exactly the same number as before the Brexit vote. I mean, it contributes £224 billion to the economy, which is 8% of the UK's total GDP.
And perhaps most impressively, Britain's net exports of financial services stand at £93 billion a year. That is more than any other country on Earth. So the question we have to ask is, why? How did London survive the loss of frictionless access to its biggest export market, the EU, and continue to boom?
You used the phrase financial plumbing a second ago. What does that actually mean in practice?
It comes down to institutional resilience and the dense, interconnected networks of specialists. London has centuries of history as a free trading hub. That history has created incredibly intricate networks of lawyers, accountants, consultants, and traders.
Right.
English common law is effectively the operating system of global business contracts. You can't just easily replicate that ecosystem in another city.
Plus, geography still matters, right? London sits in this perfect time zone window, midway between the Asian markets closing and the American markets opening. You can trade with Tokyo in the morning and New York in the afternoon.
Geography is crucial. And practically speaking, the fierce competition from European cities just never fully materialized. Cities like Paris, Frankfurt, and Amsterdam all fought for the business after Brexit, hoping to lure companies away. But Europe simply doesn't have a singular, unified financial center that can truly rival the depth and breadth of London's talent pool.
Which explains why huge American banks are pulling back. JP Morgan and Citigroup are actively spending billions to expand their massive headquarters in Canary Wharf,
Yeah.
which is London's secondary hypermodern financial district out in the east of the city. They're laying down physical roots.
This success highlights something vital: the immense value of stable, predictable governance. Capital flows to where the rules of the game are clear, where property rights are enforced, and where institutions are fundamentally trusted.
To really emphasize how important that trust is, let's contrast London's regulatory stability with the authoritarian instability we saw in our sources regarding Tanzania. In Tanzania, the government of President Samia Suluhu Hassan recently whitewashed a horrific post-election massacre where 518 people were killed.
The government appointed a commission to investigate, but it shamelessly blamed the deaths on trained agitators supported by vague outside forces,
Right.
completely refusing to hold their own security forces accountable.
And what happens when a government operates with that level of impunity? A pall of fear hangs over the country, independent media is muzzled, and crucially for the economy, it drives away foreign investment and tourism. You simply cannot build a thriving global market in an environment where the rule of law is an illusion and the institutions are broken.
If we connect this back to our broader exploration today, it really all comes down to reliable priming. Global capital, human progress, and economic stability all rely on trusted, functional networks. Whether that's the physical pipelines and shipping lanes of the Persian Gulf, the hyper-complex silicon supply chains of Taiwan, or the trusted legal and financial frameworks of London. When the plumbing works, the world hums along. When it breaks, everything grinds to a halt.
And for you, our listener, understanding these interconnected systems, how an oil choke point in the Middle East drives inflation, which pressures central bank politics in Washington, which happens right alongside a tech hardware crunch in Asia, this is exactly how you build advanced English fluency.
Absolutely.
You aren't just memorizing vocabulary, you're learning how to articulate complex, systemic, global concepts.
It's been a wide-ranging session today, and as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final puzzle to mull over.
Okay, let's hear it.
Today, we've seen how physical bottlenecks, a blocked strait in the Middle East, a lack of copper wire and gas turbines for data centers, a shortage of microchips from Taiwan, can bring both the physical and the digital worlds to their knees. As we look to the future, it raises a critical question. In an era where we passionately believe everything is moving to the cloud, becoming wireless, and becoming virtual, are we actually more dependent on fragile physical hardware and physical geography than we have ever been at any point in human history?
Wow. That's a thought that will definitely stay with you long after you take off your headphones. Are we actually more tethered to the physical earth just as we try to escape into the digital cloud? Thank you so much for joining us for today's practice on the Speak Of English Hub. Keep practicing, keep listening, and most importantly, keep questioning the world around you. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for being with us. See you on our next video. Let's speak up.